Miette had just caught sight of the gun lying on the grass, and with a thoughtful air she murmured, "Ah, so it's decided then. There's your gun." "Yes," replied Silver after a brief pause, his voice still faltering. "It's my gun. I thought it best to remove it from the house tonight. Tomorrow morning Aunt Dede might have seen me take it, and have felt uneasy about it. I'm going to hide it, and she'll fetch it just before starting." Then, as Miette could not remove her eyes from the weapon which he had so foolishly left on the grass, he jumped up and again hid it among the wood stacks. "We learned this morning," he said, as he resumed his seat, "that the insurgents of La Palud and Saint-Martin-de-Vaux were on the march, and spent last night at Alboise. We have decided to join them. Some of the workmen of Plassans have already left the town this afternoon, and those who still remain will join their brothers tomorrow." He spoke the word brothers with youthful emphasis. "A contest is becoming inevitable," he added, "but at any rate we have right on our side, and we shall triumph." Miette listened to Silver, her eyes meantime gazing in front of her, without observing anything. "'Tis well," she said, when he had finished speaking. And after a fresh pause she continued, "You warned me, yet I still hoped. However, it is decided." Neither of them knew what else to say. The green path in the deserted corner of the woodyard relapsed into melancholy stillness. Only the moon chased the shadows of the piles of timber over the grass. The two young people on the tombstone remained silent and motionless in the pale light. Silver had passed his arm round Miette's waist, and she was leaning against his shoulder. They exchanged no kisses, naught but an embrace, in which love showed the innocent tenderness of fraternal affection. Miette was enveloped in a long brown hooded cloak reaching to her feet, and leaving only her head and hands visible. The women of the lower classes in Provence, the peasantry and workpeople, still wear these ample cloaks, which are called pelisses. It is a fashion which must have lasted for ages. Miette had thrown back her hood on arriving. Living in the open air and born of a hot-blooded race, she never wore a cap. Her bare head showed in bold relief against the wall, which the moonlight whitened. She was still a child, no doubt, but a child ripening into womanhood. She had reached that adorable, uncertain hour when the frolicsome girl changes to a young woman. At that stage of life, a bud-like delicacy, a hesitancy of contour that is exquisitely charming, distinguishes young girls. The outlines of womanhood appear amidst girlhood's innocent slimness, and woman shoots forth at first all embarrassment, still retaining much of the child, and ever and unconsciously betraying her sex. This period is very unpropitious for some girls, who suddenly shoot up, become ugly, sallow and frail, like plants before their due season. For those, however, who, like Miette, are healthy and live in the open air, it is a time of delightful gracefulness, which once past can never be recalled. Miette was 13 years of age, and although strong and sturdy, did not look any older, so bright and childish was the smile which lit up her countenance. However, she was nearly as tall as Silver, plump and full of life. Like her lover, she had no common beauty. She would not have been considered ugly, but she might have appeared peculiar to many young exquisites. Her rich black hair rose roughly erect above her forehead, streamed back like a rushing wave, and flowed over her head and neck like an inky sea, tossing and bubbling capriciously. It was very thick and inconvenient to arrange. However, she twisted it as tightly as possible into coils as thick as a child's fist, which she wound together at the back of her head. She had little time to devote to her toilette, but this huge chignon, hastily contrived without the aid of any mirror, was often instinct with vigorous grace. On seeing her thus naturally helmeted with a mass of frizzy hair which hung about her neck and temples like a mane, one could readily understand why she always went bareheaded, heedless alike of rain and frost. Under her dark locks appeared her low forehead, curved and golden like a crescent moon. Her large prominent eyes, her short tip-tilted nose with dilated nostrils, and her thick ruddy lips, when regarded apart from one another, would have looked ugly. Viewed, however, all together, amidst the delightful roundness and vivacious mobility of her countenance, they formed an ensemble of strange, surprising beauty. When Miette laughed, throwing back her head and gently resting it on her right shoulder, she resembled an old-time bacchante, her throat distending with sonorous gaiety, her cheeks round like those of a child, her teeth large and white, her twists of woolly hair tossed by every outburst of merriment, and waving like a crown of vine leaves. To realize that she was only a child of 13, one had to notice the innocence underlying her full womanly laughter, and especially the childlike delicacy of her chin and soft transparency of her temples. In certain lights, Miette's sun-tanned face showed yellow like amber. A little soft black down already shaded her upper lip. Toil, too, was beginning to disfigure her small hands, which, if left idle, would have become charmingly plump and delicate. Miette and Silvère long remained silent. They were reading their own anxious thoughts, and as they pondered upon the unknown terrors of the morrow, they tightened their mutual embrace. Their hearts communed with each other. They understood how useless and cruel would be any verbal plaint. The girl, however, could at last no longer contain herself, and choking with emotion, she gave expression in one phrase to their mutual misgivings. "You will come back again, won't you?" she whispered, as she hung on Silvère's neck. Silvère made no reply, but half stifling and fearing lest he should give way to tears like herself, he kissed her in brotherly fashion on the cheek, at a loss for any other consolation. Then, disengaging themselves, they again lapsed into silence. After a moment, Miette shuddered. Now that she no longer leant against Silvère's shoulder, she was becoming icy cold. Yet she would not have shuddered thus had she been in this deserted path the previous evening, seated on this tombstone, where for several seasons they had tasted so much happiness. "I'm very cold," she said, as she pulled her hood over her head. "Shall we walk about a little?" the young man asked her. "It's not yet 9 o'clock. We can take a stroll along the road." Miette reflected that for a long time she would probably not have the pleasure of another meeting, another of those evening chats, the joy of which served to sustain her all day long. "Yes, let us walk a little," she eagerly replied. "Let us go as far as the mill. I could pass the whole night like this if you wanted to." They rose from the tombstone and were soon hidden in the shadow of a pile of planks. Here Miette opened her cloak, which had a quilted lining of red twill, and threw half of it over Silvère's shoulders, thus enveloping him as he stood there close beside her. The same garment cloaked them both, and they passed their arms round each other's waist, and became, as it were, but one being. When they were thus shrouded in the pelisse, they walked slowly towards the high road, fearlessly crossing the vacant parts of the woodyard, which looked white in the moonlight. Miette had thrown the cloak over Silvère, and he had submitted to it quite naturally, as though indeed the garment rendered them a similar service every evening. The road to Nice, on either side of which the suburban houses are built, was, in the year 1851, lined with ancient elm trees, grand and gigantic ruins, still full of vigour, which the fastidious town council has replaced, some years since, by some little plane trees. When Silvère and Miette found themselves under the elms, the huge boughs of which cast shadows on the moonlit footpath, they met now and again black forms which silently skirted the house fronts. These too were amorous couples, closely wrapped in one and the same cloak, and strolling in the darkness. This style of promenading has been instituted by the young lovers of southern towns, those boys and girls among the people who mean to marry sooner or later, but who do not dislike a kiss or two in advance, know no spot where they can kiss at their ease without exposing themselves to recognition and gossip. Accordingly, while strolling about the suburbs, the plots of wasteland, the footpaths of the high road, in fact, all these places where there are few passers-by and numerous shady nooks, they conceal their identity by wrapping themselves in these long cloaks, which are capacious enough to cover a whole family. The parents tolerate these proceedings, However stiff may be provincial propriety, no apprehensions seemingly are entertained. And on the other hand, nothing could be more charming than these lovers' rambles, which appeal so keenly to the southerner's fanciful imagination. There is a veritable masquerade, fertile in innocent enjoyments, within the reach of the most humble. The girl clasps her sweetheart to her bosom, enveloping him in her own warm cloak, and no doubt it is delightful to be able to kiss one's sweetheart within those shrouding folds without danger of being recognized. One couple is exactly like another, and to the belated pedestrian who sees the vague groups gliding hither and thither, it is merely love passing, love guessed and scarce espied. The lovers know they are safely concealed within their cloaks. They converse in undertones and make themselves quite at home. Most frequently they do not converse at all, but walk along at random and in silence, content in their embrace. The climate alone is to blame for having in the first instance prompted these young lovers to retire to secluded spots in the suburbs. On fine summer nights one cannot walk around Plassans without coming across a hooded couple in every patch of shadow falling from the house walls. Certain places, the Aire Saint-Mitre for example, are full of these dark dominoes brushing past one another, gliding softly in the warm nocturnal air. One might imagine they were guests invited to some mysterious ball given by the stars to lowly lovers. When the weather is very warm and the girls do not wear cloaks, they simply turn up their overskirts. And in the winter, the more passionate lovers make light of the frosts. Thus, Miette and Silver, as they descended the Nice road, thought little of the chill December night. They passed through the slumbering suburb without exchanging a word, but enjoying the mute delight of their warm embrace. Their hearts were heavy. The joy which they felt in being side by side was tinged with the painful emotion which comes from the thought of approaching severance, and it seemed to them that they could never exhaust the mingled sweetness and bitterness of the silence which slowly lulled their steps. But the houses soon grew fewer, and they reached the end of the faubourg. There stands the entrance to the Jas-Meffrin, an iron gate fixed to two strong pillars, a low row of mulberry trees being visible through the bars. Silver and Miette instinctively cast a glance inside as they passed on. Beyond the Jas-Meffrin, the road descends with a gentle slope to a valley, which serves as the bed of a little rivulet, the Viorne, a brook in summer but a torrent in winter. The rows of elms still extended the whole way at that time, making the high road a magnificent avenue, which cast a broad band of gigantic trees across the hill, which was planted with corn and stunted vines. On that December night, under the clear cold moonlight, the newly ploughed fields stretching away on either hand resembled vast beds of greyish wadding, which deadened every sound in the atmosphere. The dull murmur of the Viorne in the distance alone sent a quivering thrill through the profound silence of the countryside. End of section 1.